Hey guys, welcome back to another recorded lecture of the coding camp. This time it will be coding camp day 5. And just an FYI, this will be our last video that will be posted to our YouTube channel. It will be the last concept we are covering, which will be if statements. And we have a really fun project that we'll be coding today, and hopefully you guys can follow along. And yeah, I'm really excited to get started. So let's do just that. Just a quick overview of the schedule. We've learned a lot so far. We've done our intro with Scratch, and then the 3 concepts we've taught you already is print statements, variables, and keyboard input. And like I said, today we will be getting to if statements with Java, and then we'll be coding Blackjack. Blackjack is a pretty popular card game. You might also have heard of it as 21, the name 21. Yeah, like I said, pretty popular card game, and we'll be coding that today. And then we will have an asynchronous assignment that should be in the description of this video. If it's not, then just wait. It might take a day or two to be added in, and just hang tight. But yeah, that'll be it, and it will be the last concept we will be teaching in Java. So, like I said, continuing Java, we'll be continuing to use code HS, and we'll learn how to use if statements and code the card game Blackjack or 21. And if you guys want to review anything we have learned so far, because today we'll be jumping straight into if statements. If you want to review println, print statements, variables, or keyboard input, just reference back to our videos or reference back to the assignments that we gave you guys when the coding camp was live. And you should be able to review that. Those 2 videos for keyboard input and variables should be on the YouTube. You can reference them whenever. If you ever feel lost during this video or anytime when you're coding, feel free to review those. So once again, please go to www.codehs.com if you want to follow along with me. And let's get started. So it'll probably bring you to this screen. We know this screen pretty well by now. We'll go to Sandbox, and then we'll name our program. And since our final project is going to be called Blackjack, we'll just name it Blackjack. Program, Java main, and create program. All right. So once again, we have our blank project screen, and we're going to change the name. Call that Blackjack, and then make sure to rename your file name as well. Java rename. All right, now we are good to get started. So let's just run that, make sure everything works. Once again, if you feel pretty comfortable with this, then you can just skip ahead because we have done this quite a few times. Looks like our code is working and we're ready to get started. So now we are once again going to be doing if statements today. However, before if statements, we need to use keyboard input. If statements and keyboard input sort of go hand in hand. And once again, if you need a reference for keyboard input, if you forgot how it works, feel free to go to our YouTube channel and watch and reference the video for that. But once again, we'll just be moving right along. We'll have to import the keyboard input tool. So we have to have 2 statements, if you remember. Import java.util.scanner up here, followed by that semicolon. And then we will need to have one more statement in the actual body of our code, and that will be scanner input equals new and then system.in, because once again, it is an input. Keyboard input is an input, not an output. So now that we have those 2 statements in our code, we can finally do keyboard input. We'll be doing a lot of keyboard input today. Like I said, if statements and keyboard input work well together, and we need one for the other. And yeah, so now that we have these two statements, our code is able to do keyboard input. All right, so let's start with the concept of if statements. We've said it a lot already, and a lot of you might be confused as to what if statements might be. So let's do an explanation of if statements. We'll go to our doc right here. So if statements are conditional code. Conditional code means code that has a condition. It is based off of a condition that is found somewhere else in the code. It allows us to change the output based on our input. So there can be multiple different inputs, which we'll get into soon, and those multiple different inputs would have multiple different outputs. So it is essentially telling or having the computer itself figure out which output to give based off of your code. Now, it might sound a little confusing, but once we start actually coding and working with these if statements, it should make a lot more sense. So once again, we're going to continue working with variables, and this is the general format of an if statement. So we have if, and then in parentheses, a variable is less than a value. Then we have these two brackets, and you enter your code here. Usually this is a print statement. You're printing out something because that's the most common type of output that we know, printing out something. And once again, it doesn't have to be variable is less than value. There are lots of different operations in Java, and these are the most common examples. So there's equals, there's less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and then there's the and. Once again, this is quite a lot of information, and a lot of it might not make sense, but that's why we're going to use CodeHS. CodeHS is going to allow us to see that firsthand and show us how all of this works. But this is the general format of an if statement. If a variable and then an operation is the value, and then you put your code for the output. This is your output that you want inside of these two brackets. Now, let's see that in action, and let's do an example. So we have to start off for this example. We'll do voting. Let's try voting. Yeah. So we know that the voting age in America is 18. Once you turn 18, you are eligible to vote. You can vote. You can vote for presidents or anybody, any politician in the government. But you have to be 18. So if you're 18 or older, you can vote. But anyone younger than 18, no matter what, 17-year-olds, 5-year-olds, they cannot vote no matter what. So let's try to simulate that using if statements. And we're going to have to start by using keyboard input. So we'll have our first print statement, and we'll ask, how old are you? So we ask, how old are you? And then, as always with keyboard input, we'll have int age equals input dot next int. All right, so we have our first keyboard input lines of code. Now let's run it and make sure it works. Oh, looks like we forgot a semicolon right here. And that just goes to show, remember, like we reiterated in the past videos, you always have to make sure to pay attention to the details in Java. Make sure you never forget your punctuation like I just did, or the capitalization of the system, scanner, int, right over here, so on. Make sure it's exactly how mine is, because you will get an error like I just did. So we added that punctuation, that semicolon right here. So it should be good to go now. And it is. So it asks, how old are you? I'm 18, so I'll put 18. And nothing happened because we don't have an output. We don't have a system.out.print statement or anything like that to output our age. But this means that the computer stored 18 inside of the variable int age. So everything's working so far. Now that we have our keyboard input taken care of, we have to get into the actual if statements. Remember, this is how an if statement works. So we're going to need two if statements for this scenario, voting. There is the two aspects to this scenario are whether you're eligible to vote or whether you're not. There's only two outputs that are possible. There's no in between. You can either vote or you can't vote. So it's quite simple. That's why we're going to need two if statements. So our first one is going to be if, followed by the parentheses, and we'll use our variable that we've created, so age. So now you can vote if you're 18 or older. So 18 or older, to do that, we're going to need to use one of these operations. And we're going to need to use the greater than or equal to operator. Let me highlight that. This is the one we're going to need to use, because if you're greater than or equal to 18, then you can vote. So that is this symbol right here. Let's see how to put that into Java. So we have our symbol greater than or equal to, and then 18, which is our value that was right here that we're supposed to put right there. So if age is greater than or equal to 18, and then we have our brackets, and this is where we put our output. This is where our output goes. And our output is 99% of the time, it's a print statement because that's the only outputs we know. So if age is greater than or equal to 18, system.out.println, and then in quotation marks, we'll put, you can vote. Semicolon. And that's it. That's our first if statement. It's that simple. If, and then in parentheses, age is greater than or equal to 18, then in two brackets right here, 1 and 2, we have in the middle of those system.out.println, you can vote. However, now we need that second if statement. We would normally, we taught you guys to keep running your program to make sure it works. But with if statements, we sort of have to make sure that we have all of our if statements coded, and then we can run our program, because right now we don't have any code for what happens when you're under 18 or if your age is below 18. So we need to have all of our if statements before we can check our code. But our first statement, if statement, does look good. So moving on to our second if statement. If it's formatted the exact same way, all of our if statements will be formatted the same way. Now we need if age is less than 18. So we have that sign, less than sign is right here, this one. So if age is less than 18, and brackets, then we'll have another print statement. And what you can do in Java is a lot of the time you can just copy your print statements and put them right here. And all you have to change is whatever's in the quotation marks. So if age is less than 18, we have to print out, you cannot vote yet. All right. That makes sense, because if your age is below 18, then legally you can't vote. You have to be 18 to vote. So let's now run our code and see if it works. We can save it right there, so that way if we ever exit out of CodeHS, our progress is saved. But let's run this, because we have our two if statements and that's all we needed. So it asks, how old are you? First, let's put my age. I'm 18, so legally I should be able to vote. let's see if our code is able to output that. 18, and look at that. It says you can vote, which is correct. That's all because of our if statement right here. If age is greater than or equal to 18, it prints out you can vote. Let's run it again and try a greater age. So even if I was 50 years old, I should still be able to vote. So I'll put 50, and it still says you can vote. Now, let's see what happens if I put in a younger age. A lot of you guys watching this video may be around the age of 11 or 12. So quite a ways away from 18. So let's put the age 12. And look at that. It prints out you cannot vote yet, which is absolutely correct. It did the right thing. Because if you're 12 years old, you're legally not allowed to vote. So this is a quick example and a really practical example of how if statements are used. Just by using these two if statements, we can have the computer figure out whether you can vote or not based off of your age. And you are entering your own age, which makes it very interactive. So that's how if statements work. Now, we can use this knowledge to code all sorts of things. And like I said, what we're going to be coding is the card game Blackjack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this document to code Blackjack, and you guys will follow along. You can follow along if you want, or just watch me, of course. But I'm going to be deleting this for now, so that way we don't have to keep going through this how old are you prompt. So, but if you're still a little confused and you want to rewatch, feel free. As long as you rewind the video, you can look at this again and you can see how these if statements work. But for the sake of moving on to Blackjack, I'm going to delete this. All right, so now we're going to be moving on to Blackjack. So Blackjack is a card game that some of you may know and some of you may not know. But the rules are pretty simple. You have two players that each have hands. So they have hands of cards, and their cards add up to something. So if you have a 10 and a 9, that adds up to 19. And so on. If you have a 5 and a 7, that adds up to 12. So your hands have numbers. And then in Blackjack, or like I said, sometimes it's called 21, you want to get the highest number possible without going over 21. 21 is the magic number. 21 is the highest score you can have in this card game in Blackjack. So if you hit 21, you're almost always either going to win or tie if the other player also has 21. But you always want to have the highest hand of cards. So if player 1 has 17, player 2 has 5, then player 1 would win because 17 is bigger than 5. But the thing with Blackjack is that if you go over 21, then no matter what, you lose. So if player 1 only has 5, their score is 5, but player 2 has 23, they went over 21. That means they automatically lost, and player 1 won. Player 1 succeeded in winning, even though their score was only 5. And that's because player 2, they went over 21. Their score was over 21. So you never want to go over 21 in Blackjack. So let's code that card game in Java. We'll start by doing a simple print statement. And we'll give it a title. Once again, this card game is called Blackjack, and that will be our title. So after this, we need to start off with keyboard input. We need to get the scores for the two hands. And once again, hands are just the term for the cards that someone has. If you're confused on all these terms, basically it's just the score. So hand 1 is going to be player 1's score, and then hand 2 is going to be player 2's score. So we're going to have keyboard input that we have to do first. So we'll do system.out.print, and we'll ask for hand 1. And then we'll create an integer, an int for hand 1, and that equals input dot next int. And there we go. We have our keyboard input done for hand 1. And now we'll have to do the same thing for hand 2. So once again, we can just copy paste this right here. We have system.out.print hand 2. And then we can copy paste this. We have int hand 2 equals input.next int. So there we go. We have keyboard input done for 2 variables, int hand 1 and int hand 2. So those are the 2 scores that we're going to be using for this card game. So once again, let's just run our code. Before we start using these if statements, we're going to have to create quite a few for these and for this card game. And you'll see why in just a second. So let's run this before we get into these if statements. Run the program. And we have our title, and then it lets us enter in something for hand 1. So let's just put any number, hand 2, any number, and there we go. It stores them. So our program is working fine, and we are ready to move on to the if statements. So let's start with our first if statement. We're going to have if, and we always have to make sure to have the parentheses. So let's go back to the rules of the game. We want to see what happens when one of these variables, if let's say hand 1 is greater than hand 2, because then hand 1 would win. The entire point of the card game, Blackjack, is to have a higher score than the other person. So we're going to have to use these operations, as well as the and symbol, and I'll show you why in just a second, to let the computer know what to do in each situation, because there are lots of situations that can happen in this card game. So let's start. If hand 1 is greater than hand 2, and once again, this is the greater symbol. So if hand 1 is greater than hand 2, and then we have to take into account, we have to make sure to check that hand 1 is less than or equal to 21. Because remember, you can't go over 21. You have to either be at 21 or below it. If you go over 21, then you automatically lose. So that's where we have the and symbol, because we have 2 conditions. Remember, if statements is all about conditional code. So right now, in this one if statement, there's going to be 2 conditions. The first condition is that hand 1 is greater than hand 2. The second condition, which we attach using an and then and is always 2 and symbols. So if we want to have an and right here, we have to put these 2 and symbols. And then we put hand 1 is less than or equal to 21. And how we do that is the less than or equal to symbol. So we have less than or equal to 21. So if hand 1 is greater than hand 2, and hand 1 is less than or equal to 21, we have our brackets. That means we have a print statement, system.out.print. This would mean if hand 1 was greater than hand 2, and hand 1 was less than or equal to 21, which means it did not go over 21, which would mean it would automatically lose. So it won fair and square. That's all there is to it. So we would have to put player 1 wins. Because if it satisfies these 2 conditions, hand 1 is greater than hand 2, and hand one is less than or equal to 21, that would mean player one wins. So that is our first if statement. And we're going to have quite a few more in order to make sure we cover all of the situations possible in this card game. So now we have our first scenario of player one winning. Now we need to have one for player two winning. So to do that, we'll have to create one more if statement. So we can just copy paste this if statement and then change up whatever we need to. So our second if statement is going to be if, followed by parentheses. So like I said, we need to make a scenario for player two winning. So we'll have if hand two is greater than hand one, and, which is these two and symbols. Now we need to make sure hand two is less than or equal to 21. So these are the two conditions for hand two winning. Hand two is greater than hand one, and then hand two is less than or equal to 21. So now this would mean player two wins. That's all we had to change to make player two win. So that is our second if statement. So now we have to move on to what happens if a player goes over 21. Because like I've said already multiple times, if a player goes over 21, if their score goes over 21, that means they automatically lose. So we have to have a scenario for that. So let's see how we do that. In order to do that, we will need another if statement. And this time we'll have to, let's say player one or hand one, they're interchangeable basically. Let's say hand one goes over 21. What do we do if that happens? So if hand one is greater than 21, so their score went over 21, which we know that means they should automatically lose. So if hand one is greater than 21 and hand two is less than or equal to 21, then player two wins. Now, what is the reason for this? It's because hand one went over 21. Their score was above 21. So let's say 25, 30, anything like that. So now all hand two has to be is less than or equal to 21, and then they automatically win. Player two automatically wins. So as long as they are 21 or below, then they win. So it doesn't matter if they're 2, if they're 5, if they're 7, if they're 20, if they're 21, it doesn't matter. As long as they satisfy this condition that is highlighted right now, then player two wins. And that is what we put for our output. So that is what happens if player one goes over 21. Now we need to have the same scenario for player two. So we're going to have one more if statement. This is our 4th if statement. So now we need to have, like I said, the same scenario. To do that, what we'll do is we'll just change up a very few things. We just need to change this hand one to hand two, because now hand two or player two went over 21. And then we'll need to have hand one is less than or equal to 21. And that would mean player one wins. That is our 4th if statement right here. So once again, I'll explain this. This time, hand two or player two, their score went over 21, which is not allowed. That means they automatically lose. And all hand one has to do is be less than or equal to 21, and then player one wins. So once again, even if they're 1, even if their score is 1, or even if their score is 2 or 3, as long as they satisfy this condition, which those numbers do, then player one wins. So we have our 4 if statements already. And if I'm going fast, feel free to pause right here and copy down what I have, or even rewind and watch this part of the video again, so that way you can catch up and understand what is going on. because I understand that this is a new concept and I am going a little fast because there are a lot of if statements to cover. But once again, you can slow down the speed of the video, or you can just rewind and catch up and review to make sure that you understand this concept of if statements. So moving on, we're going to need to have more if statements because there are more scenarios that can happen in Blackjack. Our next scenario is going to be what happens if both these players go over 21. Right now, we only have one of them going over 21. So like player one in this case, or hand one in this case, and then hand two in this case. But what if both of these players go over 21? So we'll have one more if statement. I just copy pasted one of my older ones, and then we're going to make some changes. So this time we're going to have if both these players go over 21. So we have if hand one is greater than 21 and hand two, we'll change this to greater than 21. So this time, both hand one and hand two, their scores have gone over 21. Now, if this happens, what would you guys think the outcome or the output would be? Well, like we said, it's not allowed to go over 21. You automatically lose. So that means both hand one and hand two, both player one and player two, would lose. Nobody would be a winner in this scenario if this happened. Basically, if both of them went over 21, there would be no winner. And that is what we put for our output, our system.out.print, no winner. That is what happens if player one and player two both go over 21. So that is our fifth if statement. So we just need a few more to finish up this card game. We already have 5. And now our next scenario, our next situation is going to be what happens if both of these players have the same exact score? Like we said, anything below 21, so 21 or below, is fair game. It can be 17, it can be 5, 10. Anything like that is legal and it's allowed. So those scores count and you're trying to get the highest score. But what if player one and player two have the exact same score? What if they both have like 15? So player one has 15 and player two has 15. What would happen in that case? So we need another if statement. And in this case, our if statement is going to figure out what happens if they both have the same score. So to do that, what we will have to do, let's reference back to this document. Once again, you can always pause the video or take a picture of this document right here, all of these, because I know these operations might be a little difficult to memorize. So feel free to take a picture of this so that way you can have it nearby when I switch tabs. So for this, we're going to need to use this operation, the equals operation, and I'll show you why. So we have our sixth if statement. So we need to see what happens if hand one and hand two are the same. So for this, like we said, hand one and hand two are going to be the same score. That is what we're trying to figure out. So all we need to do is have if hand one equals, once again, the equals operation is right here, the two equals symbols. If hand one equals hand two, then our print statement, once again, if you think you know what's going to happen, you can just pause the video and keep coding by yourself and see if you get the same answer as me. But I'll tell you the answer. If hand one equals hand two, if they're the same score, like in the example that I used was 15, if hand one and hand two, so player one and player two, both have the score of 15, then there's going to be a tie. So our output is going to be tie. That is what we want to output if hand one equals hand two. So we're almost done. We have our last if statement to do. And our last if statement is going to deal with what if both player 1 and player 2 have the score of 21. Because once again, the goal of this game is to have the score of 21. Like I said, 21 is the highest score possible in this game. That is the magic number. Both player 1 and player 2 want to have the score of 21. But what happens if both of them do have the score of 21? Because if, let's say, player 1 had 21, but player 2 had maybe 17, then player 1 would win because they're higher. They have 21. They have the highest score possible. But if player 1 and player 2 both had 21, then there would be another tie because that's the highest score and they both have it. So that is going to be our last if statement. We have to have if, and then I'll type this one out for you guys because I know I've copied and pasted a lot of them, and you guys can either copy and paste like I am, or if you want to, you can type them out by hand like I'm doing right now for this last one. So if hand 1 equals, we're using the equals operation again, this one. So if hand 1 equals 21, then we need the and because now we need to do hand 2. So this is the and symbol once again. So if hand 1 equals 21 and hand 2 equals 21, and that is going to be our if. So then we need the brackets one more time. So if hand 1 equals 21 and hand 2 equals 21, then our output system.out.print is going to be, like I said before, one more tie, semicolon, because once again, if they both have the score of 21, that's the highest score possible, then the game results in a tie. Both player 1 and player 2 would win. It would be a tie. And there you have it. We have created a simple version of the card game Blackjack, or 21, in Java, all by using if statements and keyboard input, as well as these variables that we created, the integers. We put everything together that we have learned so far in this coding camp, and we created the card game Blackjack. Like I said, we had to use quite a few if statements in this. Let's see what it came out to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We had to use 7 if statements, but that's because we had to make sure that we covered all the scenarios possible. We had to make sure that the card game, that whatever happens in the card game in real life, so let's say you were playing this card game with your friend, we had to make sure that Java knows anything that can happen in this card game. Now, let's see the fruits of our labor, which basically just means let's see if we were actually successfully able to make this output run. So I'll run it. And we have Blackjack, and it's asking us for hand 1. So this is player 1's score. Let's start by seeing if hand 1 or player 1 can win. Let's have their score be 20, which is very high. It's 1 away from the highest score possible. Hand 2, let's have them be 12. Let's see what happens. The computer outputs player 1 wins, which is correct. If this card game was being played in real life, then hand 1 would be the winner, which means player 1 would be the winner because they have the higher score. Let's try 19 for hand 1, and then 20 for hand 2. And look at that. It says player 2 wins. The computer is able to successfully recognize that hand 2 has the higher number. So this is very useful. It's a very useful tool when you're coding because you are basically able to tell the computer to work by itself. The fact that you coded this means that the computer is now able to use your code and recognize all of these scenarios. Let's do some more. Let's see what happens if hand 1 is 25, which means they went over 21. Their score is over 21, which is not allowed. And let's say hand two is 3. 3 is a very low number, and you usually can't win with the number 3. But this time, hand one went over 21. So let's see what happens. And look at that. Player two wins. Hand two wins, even though they just had a 3. And that's because player one went over the number 21. They automatically lost just by getting the score of 25. So once again, the computer was able to successfully recognize that. Let's do a couple more. Let's see what happens if they both go over 21. So 30 for hand one and 40 for hand two. And look at that. No winner because they both went over 21. Now, let's see what happens if they both hit 21. That's the highest score, right? 21, 21. And it prints out tie. So it prints out tie twice because we have 2 of these. We have 2 tie statements. If hand 1 equals hand 2, then it's a tie. And if hand 1 equals 21 and hand 2 equals 21, it's another tie. So if we do 17 and 17, it prints out tie again. Except it doesn't do it twice this time because it wasn't a 21. So there you go. We were successfully able to code Blackjack in Java. And you can show this to your parents, to your friends, and show them how you were able to make the computer recognize all of these numbers and know what to do in each situation. No matter what numbers you put in here, the computer knows which decision to make. And that's a really great accomplishment. That's really complicated to do in Java. And I understand it may be you might be a little confused still, but you can rewatch this video and figure out what you're doing wrong, so that way you can ultimately code this game in Java. No matter what numbers you put in, even if it's huge numbers, something that's not possible in this card game. So 500 and then let's say 19, it recognizes that player two should win in that situation. So once again, congratulations, guys. You were able to put everything together and create something very neat and very useful in Java. And it's very, you guys should be proud of yourselves that you were able to code this. So let's move on. So that's all, folks. That was Coding Camp Day 5 for Summer at TFC 2022. That was all we had to teach you guys. Once again, we put everything together in this final project, in this final video. So this is it. This is the final video that will be uploaded to our YouTube. We really thank all of you who had an interest in coding, who attended the few live sessions that we had and watched our videos. If you have any questions, you can just reference the past videos and you can rewind this video and rewatch it to see what you're confused about and how to fix anything that you might have missing in your code. And like I said before, sooner or later, there should be something in this description for extra practice if you want that. And yeah, guys, we really thank you guys for taking part in this coding camp. And we hope you guys enjoyed it. And we hope you learned something in this coding camp. You can now take this knowledge and create your own projects. You can learn more. There are all sorts of courses offered outside of TFC on coding, on Java. And the world is your oasis. You can really do whatever you want from here. And we were really excited that we were able to teach you guys the basics of coding, the basics of Java. So once again, thank you. And that's it. Have a great day, guys.